The views of George Berkeley. George Berkeley, also known as Bishop Berkeley, was one of the three famous 18th century British emperors. He was born near Kilkenny, Ireland on March 12, 1685. He was the eldest son of William Berkeley, who was English, but Berkeley always considered himself Irish. Berkeley attended Kilkenny College and then Trinity College, Dublin, where he received his master's degree. He stayed at Trinity College, Dublin, as a tutor and Greek lecturer. Around 1713, Berkeley visited England and was received into the circle of Addison, Pope, and Steele. Between 1714 and 1720, Berkeley did some very extensive traveling throughout Europe. He took holy orders in the Church of Ireland in 1721 in his doctrine in divinity. He chose to lecture again at Trinity College in Divinity and Hebrew. He was made Dean of Derry in 1724. In 1725, Berkeley formed the project of funding a college in Bermuda for training ministers for the colonies and missionaries to the Indians. He was promised a grant by the British Parliament for the college. By doing this, he gave up a very sufficient income with leaving the position as deanery. He met Anne Forster, who was the daughter of the Lord Chief Justice of Ireland. They were married in 1728 and then ventured to America. Here he received an even smaller salary. He ended up in Newport, Rhode Island, and bought a plantation, now known as the famous Whitehall. In 1730, he purchased a Negro man named Philip, who was 14 years old or so. Later that week, he purchased another Negro man around 20 years of age. He purchased a third Negro man, and in 1731, he had them all baptized. Berkeley believed slaves should be baptized Christians. He explained this to the colonists in his sermons. He explained why Christianity supported slavery. He states, "It would be of advantage to their slave masters' affairs to have slaves who should obey in all things their masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, as fearing God, that gospel liberty consists with temporal servitude, and that their slaves would only become better slaves by becoming Christian." Berkeley lived at the plantation for a while, awaiting funds for his college to arrive. In 1732, Berkeley returned to London as his funds never arrived. He was appointed Bishop of Cloyne in 1730. Berkeley, an Irish philosopher whose earliest publication was a mathematical one, wasn't actually brought into notice until he published his Essay Towards. At the time, it gave much rise to controversy, but now its conclusions are accepted as an established part of the theory of optics. The following publication was Treatise Concerning the Principles of Human Knowledge, which was in 1710, followed by 3 dialogues between Hylas and Philonous in 1713. In the dialogues, he propounded his system of philosophy, the leading principle of which it is that the world, as represented to our senses, depends for its existence, as such, on being perceived. Of this theory, the principles gives the exposition, and the dialogues the defense. His theory was largely received with ridicule, even by those who acknowledged his genius, but were convinced that his principles were false. Berkeley was a definite idealist. Everything that exists is either mind or depends for its existence upon a mind. He was best known for his motto, "Esse is percipi," to be is to be perceived. Berkeley accepted the position that ordinary physical objects are composed solely of ideas, which are inherently mental. Besides his writings on philosophy, Berkeley also wrote on mathematics, vision, economics, medicine, and Newtonian mechanics. During his own time, his most often read works concern the medicinal value of tar water. Berkeley's 2 works of metaphysics defends idealism by attacking the materialist alternative. In this sense, Berkeley is speaking of materialism as the doctrine that material things exist. Berkeley contends that no material things exist, which goes against an idea that only material things exist. Berkeley says that materialism promotes skepticism and atheism. It promotes skepticism because materialism implies that our senses mislead us as to the natures of these material things which need not exist at all, and atheism, because a material world could be expected to run without the existence of God. This provides Berkeley's motivation for questioning materialism, which he thinks should motivate others as well, though not a philosophical argument against materialism. Berkeley has further attacks on materialism and backs it by this argument. We perceive ordinary objects, we perceive only ideas. Therefore, ordinary objects are ideas. This argument is valid, and the premise looks hard to deny. But Berkeley believes that this premise is accepted by all the modern philosophers. Berkeley, in particular, believes that some version of this is accepted by his main targets, the influential philosophers Descartes and Locke. Berkeley does recognize that these philosophers have an obvious response available to this argument. This response reflects a representationalist theory of perception, according to which we indirectly perceive material things by directly perceiving ideas, which are mind-independent things. The ideas represent external material objects and thereby allow us to perceive them. Berkeley poses the question, what allows an idea to represent a material object? He assumes that the representationalist answer will involve resemblance. Berkeley argues that resemblance is non-essential. An idea can only be like another idea. Berkeley directly addresses this question as close as he can, come in his early philosophical notebooks, where he states that two things cannot be said to be alike or unalike until they have been compared. Being that the mind can compare nothing than its own ideas, which by hypothesis are the only things immediately perceivable, the representationalist cannot assert a likeness between an idea and a non-ideal, mind-independent material object. Materialism. What does it really explain? Berkeley is aware that materialism has an important piece. Aren't material objects needed in order to explain ideas? Berkeley contends that a representationalist must admit that we could have our ideas without there being any external objects causing them. This is one of the ways that Berkeley sees materialism leading to skepticism. Berkeley does state that the existence of matter does not help to explain the occurrence of our ideas. While Berkeley is undermining the materialist attempted inference, Berkeley's point also challenges any attempt to explain representation and mediate perception in terms of causation, basically saying that the materialist might try to claim that ideas represent material objects, not by resemblance, but in virtue of being caused by the objects. In Berkeley's works, The Principle and the Dialogues, Berkeley speaks on what he calls the master argument. This argument states that we cannot actually conceive of mind-independent objects which are unperceived and unthought of. It was said that this argument conflates the representation, which is what we conceive, with, and the represented being what we conceive of, or the content of our thought. Once the distinction is made, it is noted we must have some conception or representation in order to conceive of something, and that representation is in some sense thought of. It does not follow that what we conceive of must be thought of as an object. This argument fails. Berkeley points that we cannot represent unconceivedness because we have never and could never experience it, and because we cannot represent this, we cannot conceive of mind-independent objects either. In Berkeley's principle, his metaphysics are very apparent. He says it is evident to anyone who takes a survey of the objects of human knowledge that they are either ideas actually imprinted on the senses, or else such as are perceived by attending to the passions and operation of the mind, or lastly ideas formed by help of memory or imagination, either compounding, dividing, or barely representing those originally perceived in aforesaid ways. As this shows, Berkeley does not deny the existence of ordinary objects such as stones, trees, books, and apples. On the contrary, Berkeley holds that only an immaterialist account of such objects can avoid skepticism about their existence and nature. Objects turn out to be bundles or collections of ideas. Berkeley does state that there are two sides to the process of bundling ideas into objects. co-occurrence, which is the objective fact about what sorts of ideas tend to accompany each other in our experience, and co-occurring ideas, which are something we decide to single out and refer with a certain name. Finishing that there is no material world in Berkeley's eyes, there is a physical world, which is a world of ordinary objects. The world is mind-dependent, for it's composed of ideas, which existence consists in being perceived. There was a view that was less popular, believed by Cartesian and Lockean, which was dualism. This view focused on only being an existent of material things. Berkeley said that this question cannot be satisfactorily answered by the materialists, and they cannot characterize their supposed material things. Again, what Berkeley